Okay, today we're going to learn about infrared radiation and some of its uses. So to begin with, it's important to know that infrared is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It sits just between microwaves and visible light. Just like all of the other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, it's a type of transverse wave that travels at 300 million meters per second in a vacuum. That's the speed of light. So, what we're going to do is we're going to dive straight in and learn about some of the uses of infrared radiation. So number one is thermal imaging. So, whenever we think about infrared, we often think about heat because that's how a lot of heat is transferred. So if we think about thermal imaging, it works like this. Because infrared radiation is given out by every hot object. The hotter the object, the more infrared radiation it gives out. So even though we can't see it, because the only part of the electromagnetic spectrum we can see is the visible light spectrum, even though we can't see it, if anything is a hot object, it's giving out this radiation. Now, obviously our eyes can't detect it, but we can use equipment called infrared cameras that can detect this infrared radiation in order to create an image, hence thermal imaging, creating an image using heat. Now, often police can use it to see suspects that are trying to escape and hide in the dark. They often have infrared cameras fitted on helicopters if they're chasing suspects. Another use is cooking. So what I've got right here is I've got a cross section of a toaster, and here's some bread that's been put into the toaster. So what actually can happen with cooking is infrared radiation is given out by the heating elements of the toaster. So all the way across the heating elements, we're giving out infrared radiation. Now what happens, in order for this to work, food absorbs the infrared radiation. And as it does, it causes it to cook. So that is how cooking works with infrared radiation. Number three is heaters. So again, if you have a heater, it emits lots of infrared radiation that can then travel or transmit throughout the room. It basically transfers lots of energy to the thermal store of different objects, causing their temperature to increase. You do need to know though that if you have too much of this infrared radiation, it is absorbed by the skin and it can cause burns. So infrared radiation can be dangerous because it can cause burns. Okay, next up, we have remote controls. So the first three kind of demonstrate infrared radiation in terms of heat, or in terms of heat. But we can also use it to transfer information. So lots and lots of remote controls use infrared radiation in order to transfer information. So when you press the buttons on your remote, it emits infrared radiation, which can then be picked up by a receiver within, let's say, your television. Now, the reason why that it works for this is basically the distances need to be fairly small, and it must be in the line of sight. So you can't really turn on and off your TV for devices that are next door, for example. Now, the final one we need to know about, the final use, is optical fibers. Now, optical fibers are thin glass or plastic fibers that carry data, for example, for telephones and computers. They carry the data over long distances. Now, what happens is the infrared travels along the wire, along the optical fibre, using a process referred to as total internal reflection. And you can learn more about that in another video. So essentially, those are the 5 uses of infrared radiation we need to know about: thermal imaging, cooking, heaters, remote controls and optical fibres. And the dangerous thing about infrared radiation is our skin can absorb it, so infrared radiation can cause burns. Thank you.